Hello, students. Welcome back to Professor Jay's Little History Lessons. I'm recording this tonight, which will be tomorrow morning for you all to actually watch this. So we're going to recap Module 1 just for a few minutes and go into Module 2. I want you to see that it's setup's kind of about the same as it always has been. I'm learning a little bit more about how to use the Zoom and things that I can do with it. And one of those things will be to get a green screen and then put up a virtual background back here. Haven't figured out what we're going to use just yet. But it's like anything else that I learn with. The more I do it, the better I get with it until I become a master with it. So we'll be trying to add on to some of these things over time. What I want to do right now is go over a couple things with you from last week. Well, the first thing I want to talk about is history versus heritage. Some of us, well, I think everybody's fine on this, just want to clear up something. And I want to do this by going to a saying by Ray Raphael and George Santayana. So let's start with George Santayana first. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We've also got another one by Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, something to that effect. So we see the past, things and ideas from the past occurring again and again, mostly because people keep thinking that they can do the same thing over again and that it'll have different outcomes. That's usually what we call the definition of insanity, because it doesn't really turn out different. When history and heritage, the reason why we see two different things, and I'll go right into this from Ray, history is about the past exclusively, and its modalities are inquiry and understanding. Heritage is how we use the past to see it in the present. It is more about cultural identity and affirmation. The past does not change. The best way I can really describe heritage and history is probably the one that infuriates a lot of people. It's called the lost cause of the Civil War, the lost cause of the Confederacy. You see, there's this Civil War that started in 1861, and it was caused by slavery. And the people who are in favor of the lost cause, they are upset with that. They don't want it to be about slavery, because then their ancestors would have fought to defend slavery. Well, we know it's about slavery because the people who chose succession, let me stop my dogs from getting into the middle of the video as usual. The reason that we know this is the people who decided to succeed, who wanted to succeed, who caused the Civil War, said that they were doing so because of slavery. And they took great pains to write this down and make sure that everybody knew that's what this was about. One of our writers, James McPherson, great historian, Pulitzer Prize winner, former historian at Princeton. He is retired now. James has read 25,000 different plus letters of men who served on both sides of the war, be that on the Union side or on the Confederate side. And James, in his letters, that people fight, it's not necessarily the same reason why the war started. He sat there and said overwhelmingly, you can see through the letters, especially early in the war, that on the Confederate side, it was because of slavery. They keep talking about their way of life. When they explained what the way of life was, it was about white supremacy and slavery. That doesn't excuse the North from being racist. That's the next charge that somebody throws at it. But it explains the cause of the Civil War. Again, we have the facts. It was written down quite well. The lost causes developed after the Civil War, when it became quite apparent that the history is going to be written as the Civil War caused by this. And there's more to this lost cause. It has a lot to do with what took place during Reconstruction and the elimination of Black rights after Reconstruction came to an end. And this would last all the way into the Civil Rights era. So that's the lost cause. It's when you look to the historical facts, using primary sources no less, we see that it doesn't hold its own water. The people in favor of the lost cause today generally look to it as a reason to justify their current political ideology. This is what also is interesting about this. You hear them start screaming about liberal this, liberal that. It has nothing to do with that. This is about facts. This is what the people in the past said. But the people of today who are really in favor of the lost cause tend to be ones who see it as legitimizing their ideology. And I wouldn't say that's when you say Democrat or Republican, I would just say it's involved in that. It's something different altogether. And I'll let you work on that one yourself. But as Ray points out, it's about cultural identity and affirmation. That's the problem with heritage. History, as Ray said, is based on the past exclusively, and the modalities are inquiry and understanding. We look to the past, we look to find evidence, we do research, and we develop an understanding. Cultural identity and affirmation don't come into that. It's about using facts. And sometimes you will see heritage and history go a long way, completely opposite direction. So this is where some of the things that historians work to debunk these myths. The other one is bias, and I don't want to spend very much time on it. I've been talking through the discussions, and in discussions, I think I've hit bias pretty hard. If you think, well, everyone has bias. You cannot get rid of bias. Bias is shaped by your life experiences. It is part of who you are. You can learn what biases that you have by being honest with yourself and working to mitigate them. But no matter what you do, your bias will always be present in what you write and do. There's a myth running around that people can get rid of bias, that historians should be unbiased, that they should check their bias, that people should be unbiased. And the people who are saying that generally are biased and cannot even refuse to accept the fact that they have a bias to begin with. You can't separate this. It's you. You see things the way they are. And the reason I'm recording this and doing it now instead of before is because part of your assignment in the Schwinn versus Schweikart, why is Zen this way and why is Schweikart this way? And the answer is because it's their life experiences. Howard, who has now passed away, Howard wrote his book and on his opinions. He alienated quite a few people, but he also made a lot of people excited about history because they started seeing it through a different lens. Schweikart disliked that. And he did this 20 some years after this book was written. He wrote his book, and his book was about this attitude that the United States is a great country. Guess what? Neither man is wrong. They just used a different lens to look at the past. Schweikart, though, tends to go more onto the heritage side. So if you tend to see the supporters of his books and stuff like that, there's a lot of good information in there, but it's how it's written for an audience. Whereas Zen wrote for a different group of people. And he was bringing up the history that really, to that point, had not been brought up a lot. What really makes Zen stand out is it hit the mainstream. And this sometimes you see where a lot of historians will write stuff. It's not mainstream, Times, New York Times bestseller list. In this case, Zen's did. It hit pretty hard. And it had quite a few impacts. It really made an impression on people. And by the way, Zen did use, they're all over the book, especially the bold lines. So that's again, we see the examples, but we really want to make sure that you understand that bias is everywhere. We all have it. It colors our opinions. It colors how we look at things. It is part of who we are. Zen and Schweikart are just two guys who had very strong biases, and they are probably some of the polar opposites of the profession itself. Most historians are right in the center of everything, and it depends on what the center is. Well, we look back in the 50s and say, oh, these guys are writing with a right-wing deal, but then we say, we're writing with a left-wing deal, depending on perspectives. The really question is it them or is it you? You're the reader. You're the observer. And so, therefore, you're seeing it through your lens, your bias. Just like when I read something, I'm seeing it through my lens and my bias. But it's okay. It's part of who we are, as long as I acknowledge it. I've got all kinds of people write something. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. How am I perceiving this? And therefore I'm being aware of my own bias that I have. And I'm saying, okay, how do I want to go about this? When I read history, if, like I said, the 50s, I can see it through a certain lens. I can have a liberal view, Social Security, and then a very conservative view towards communism, which was not uncommon. But that era, that's 60 years ago, almost 70 now. So their world's not our world. And as we say also, the past is a foreign country. So when we look at bias, we see it through our lens of today, presentism, And then we've got to realize that these people in the past saw things through their lenses, their bias, and how they wrote that. Well, that's going to lead us into Module 2. And we're going to talk about primary sources, one thing, and we're also going to look at the topic worksheet that we're going to start doing the project. Those of you who are hands-on people, project, conducting research is a hands-on project. It's wonderful. So, primary sources. Here's what I do for my students in the community college. I talk about the 5 W's of history. Okay. All our stuff and the written stuff that you got for the course, we covered primary sources, you've got a quiz, you know what they are. But it's how we evaluate primary sources, and we start developing interpretations of them, and we use a lot of primary sources. James McPherson, when he wrote his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Battle Cry of Freedom, he's covering a large sum of time. And his book is based on earlier works of his, so he pulled from his previous works. And one of the books he wrote was about why men fight in the Civil War, and he used over 25,000 letters from Union and Confederate soldiers, and even got civilians involved in it. Seeing that, all these different perspectives. So we have to evaluate our sources. Sometimes the sources are good for what we're going to research, and sometimes they're not so good for what we're going to research. But we need to understand that. So the 5 W's of history. Okay, hold your hand. Okay, I always make my students hold their hand. Now, tick off each W, starting with the pinky. But, and I'm not good at the hand thing. Never do the Vulcan hand salute. When, where, who, and it leaves my thumb. I'm out of fingers, so now I have to use the thumb for the 5th one. Why? Now, which one's the most important one? Okay, let's do it this way. Hold up both hands, close the thumbs. Okay, boom, you magic Professor Jim, you no longer have thumbs. Now, pick up a 16-pound sledge and start chopping wood. Those of you who know what I'm talking about are going, huh? Those of you who don't, 16-pound sledge is like a sledgehammer, except for the shape of a giant triangle. And generally, I like to get a 16-pound sledge because it really hammers into those wood when I'm trying to split it apart. I'm not chopping it so much as I'm splitting logs for firewood. Did it as a kid, so it worked the upper body strength. Obviously, a 16-pound sledge is got a little bit of heavy, and you're rearing that up over your head and bring it down. Don't try this if you don't have thumbs, because you can't do it. Therefore, why is the most important part of history. What, when, where, who. And that's what I really love about history and asking questions. And people are always there giving me their opinions. Okay, that's fine, that's nice. Why? Oh, well, I said, you've given me an opinion, support it. Think about history as debate. You're going to debate. You have an opinion, fine. You have perspective, fine. Support your opinion, your perspective with sources. Prove to me, you don't have to be right. You may be right, you may be wrong, but you have to be able to support why you believe or why you see or interpret something the way that you do. So when we look at the what's of history, I'm going to use Fire Bill in the Night by Thomas Jefferson. It's a letter Thomas Jefferson wrote. Oh, wait, I'm already going into the what, aren't I? Okay, it's a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote when? April 22nd, 1820. I look up this class. Where? To Monticello, Virginia. Monticello, whatever. Okay, so he's sitting there, he's writing this letter. Who's he writing it to? John Holmes. So, what? Letter from Thomas Jefferson to John Holmes. When? April 22nd, 1820. Where? Monticello, Virginia. Who? Thomas. John Holmes. Just a letter. Important letter. Letter we used about an issue. Why do you write the letter? I mean, I write letters to people all the time, email. So why did Thomas write this to John? And it's important. I live in Missouri. This involves the Missouri Compromise. So this is where we understand context. Missouri Compromise. What's Missouri Compromise about? Slavery. Okay. Why is Jefferson seeing what he calls a Fire Bill in the Night? He talks about slavery as the wolf we have by its ear. And he starts going into, and I will go to the actual source, because if you're going to talk about sources, why not have the actual source up? Let me go back a minute here. he talks about, I regret that I am now to dying to believe that the useless sacrifice of themselves by the generation of 76 to acquire self-government happiness to their country is to be thrown away by the unwise and unworthy passions of their sons, and that my only consolation is not be that I live, is to be that I live, not to weep over. Jefferson will die there. What's it about? This is where we read the source. Jefferson's upset with the Missouri Compromise. Most people thought it was a great thing. But Jefferson says this is a terrible thing. And he says, if they would but dispassionately weigh the blessings they will throw away against an abstract principle more likely to be affected by union than by schism, they would pause before they would perpetuate this act of suicide on themselves and of treason against the hopes of the world. The Missouri Compromise was about the admission to the Union of Missouri as a slave state. All the states prior to this had been able to decide on their own whether they would come into the Union as a free or slave state. It really had not been a big deal. Now, territories could be decided to be slave or free. And the Northwest Territory had been, back in, before the Constitution actually, was decided to be free territory. Slavery would not really be allowed in there. The Ohio River would be this dividing line. The Southwest Territory, below that, would be slave status. Okay. Nobody really threw a big fit about this. And as the states began coming in over time, they're coming in as free and slave based on where they're at. But the people of the states get to make the choice. If you read the Constitution, you won't find anything in there about the people voting for your slave. I mean, there's nothing to say. It's left to them. It's like voting rights. What's the minimum age for voting in 1787? 1789 when the Constitution goes into effect. It's up to the states. It's not in the Constitution. But now, that's an amendment, but it wasn't then. So this idea of what the people could do was coming about through this. And so I'm getting away from some of the subject matter. So the idea was Jefferson's really upset because you're going to make a dividing line. You're going to separate the country. The Missouri southern border would become the dividing line between free and slave. No new states coming into the country north of that line could be a slave state, and none coming in north of that line would be a free state. You've taken away, this is what you're saying, you've taken away the right of the people to decide for themselves. Oh, now we're going to talk about that later when we get to 1850s and popular sovereignty, but that's 30 years later. Jefferson's sitting there saying, you're sectionalizing the country. You're going to have a north free, south slave. You're not making it to where the people make decisions. You're putting a dividing line in there of your own. And it's not your choice. He said it's not the choice of the government. It's not the federal government's responsibility. The people were all happy with it. This is what they wanted. And he says that's wrong. Well, Jefferson says that there's going to be a big war coming. He says we're going to divide over this. Slavery is going to be the problem. We've got to book by the years. We can't get rid of it, and it's going to come to be a problem, especially when you make it a section of the country. If you'd had where Minnesota could come in as a free slave state, he said, that's up to the people of the states to decide. It's their choice. Instead, you're taking it away from them, and when you take it away from them to make this choice, again, they're willing to make this choice. The whole system, he says, you're going to make this a problem. It's going to be, we worked so hard to make this non-sectionalized, made all these compromises, and now you're drawing a line in the sand, literally a line across the country. Now people thought it wasn't a big deal because at the time, you're looking at Louisiana, already a slave state. The territory that had been purchased under Jefferson, Missouri Compromise, or the Louisiana Purchase, the only really area was between Missouri now and Louisiana, Arkansas, which will probably come in, it will come in as a slave state. Okay, well, what about the rest of the states? Will they be coming in at all? I mean, how's it going to be? What's all those other territories going to be as they become slave? And a lot of people never thought they would be states to begin with, but it's just where they kick the can down the road thing. But Jefferson's doing the same thing in his letter because he's kicking the thing about slavery. It's up to some other generation to take care of it. We can't solve it ourselves. Jefferson had an unwillingness because Jefferson needed slaves to make his life worthwhile. All right, That's enough on that there. But it involves going back to our 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, why. Now, I've given you a long why. There's a lot in this letter. I show it to my students all the time, and they're just a goggle over this whole thing. They're like, but, because we have hindsight. We can look back in the past and see this. In 1820, they couldn't see that. And by the time 1860 rolled around, they didn't want to see anything. It was this way or else. And that became a terrible choice. My way and the highway doesn't. Okay, so that's the thing about primary sources. So if you take a primary source, it doesn't matter what the primary source is. A lot of you will be doing the Constitution, and you're going to look at the Federalist. You should be looking at the Federalist. 3 men who wrote the Constitution, including the guy, the father of the Constitution, wrote the Federalist. And in that, they explain what these pieces are. So again, we go to the Federalist. Who, what, when, where, and why. Who? John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, which is by now you should figure out I kind of like. And James Madison. Okay, so we got the who's. When? Okay, well, they're writing it in 1787 and 1788. It's during the ratification. That's a little context. Where? They're in New York. Okay, when, where, why? We'll get to the why. Oh, I'm losing track here already. What is it, the Federalist? It is purpose, and this gets into the why, so sometimes we fudge between this, fudge between the W's. The purpose is it's the Federalist. Let's snap back in time to 1788. They're looking at what it is. It's a document meant to influence the delegates to the New York State Convention on Ratification. Why are they writing it? Because they want the Constitution to be ratified. They spent that whole summer sequestered in Philadelphia, wanting this Constitution to be ratified, writing a new government. Now they want it to be ratified. They want to put it into action. And they've got to convince this group of people that that's what they want to do. And they were against it. Turns out New York barely ratifies the Constitution. Their vote was meaningless at the time because it had already been, 9 states had already voted for it to go into effect. And Virginia, I believe, had already voted to do it. Yeah, Virginia had already voted to ratify it, so New York became, I think, the last state, 11th. North Carolina and Rhode Island are another subject. And so it was going to go into effect. At that point, it's switched from, are we going to ratify it to, oh, what are we going to do if we don't? And it became a very big issue. But they would eventually ratify it. And things would work out there. Who, what? The Federalists. When? 1787, 1788. Where? New York, because that's what they're at. That's the capital. Who? Jefferson. Or not Jefferson. J. Madison. Hamilton. And why? To get the Constitution ratified by the delegates to the New York ratification, New York Constitution Ratification Convention. That's what they were doing. There you go. It's simple. Well, when you take primary sources, you need to apply the 5 W's and you're looking at them. Are they valid or not? Okay. It's written in 2010. Let's see. Could that be a primary source? Well, were they there? No. Oh, well, that's a big indicator then. What's it about? It's about why the Constitution is so great. Okay. But it's not a primary source. So when we're evaluating primary sources, we need to separate primary to secondary. And this is going to seg into our next section, which is on the worksheet topics. You've got a worksheet. When you do your turn-in, I want you to take the worksheet, save it in a Word doc, and then work with that. Turn that into me. All right. If you have a problem, let me know. I got it all. By the way, Microsoft 365, I have a link. I believe I put it into the plagiarism deal. So if you have any problems, you can get Microsoft 365 and download it for free for use here at Southern New Hampshire. So Southern New Hampshire, go get the deal, have it. So there's no excuse for not having Microsoft 365. So that takes care of that problem there. Download all these templates, they're there. And then you can follow those and turn them in. That's the easiest way to do this thing. Well, what topic are we going to pick? Okay. There are some topics that are the big 3. American Constitution, and I kind of break that into a wider area. Chairman Mao and the Cultural Revolution, Great Leap Forward, that stuff. It's fine if you want to choose that. I'm not knocking or anything like that. There's a lot of subjectiveness to that. And then there is apartheid in South Africa. And a lot of people pick that and really have a good time with it. They just learn so much, and they're looking and they're making nice comparisons too. So, right? So it's really interesting to see. Oh, and a lot of learning because you know, oh, it's not American history. Oh, it sure has an impact. So we start to see how this works out. My area, especially in the American Revolution through 1800-ish time period, really focus heavily. I pick up on the Constitution. I'm not Mr. Constitution. That's somebody else. But I know quite a bit about it. So if you're really wanting to have some fun with that, I'm there. I want to caution you on something though. I see this a lot with the Constitution, and I see a lot with China. Communism bad, capitalism good. Okay, fine. Why? If you're just going to tell me that that's the essence, okay, that's fine. Why? Don't sit there and tell me communism bad, capitalism good. You've got to support it. You have a debate going. Okay, let's get the other side here. Capitalism bad, communism good. Okay, they've got to have facts. You've got to have facts. Don't just sit there and tell me how great it is, or bad it is, or whatever. Don't. That's being subjective. I need you to be objective. Why? That's where the sources come in. Well, I don't have any sources. Well, they can tell me whatever they want. You have to support their opinion. We do the same thing with the Constitution. Oh, the United States is a great country. We've got a Constitution, makes it great. Okay. Why? And invariably, I've been doing this a while, not just for Southern New Hampshire, but for my own community college and some other people I work with. And a lot of people that tell me these things can't tell me the history. Why is the Constitution? Why is the United States great? Because of the Constitution. Why did they put this in? Why did they write it? Why did they replace the existing government? And usually at that point, people are like, what? They didn't like the British. Yeah, that's not the point. What about the Articles of Confederation? Oh, well, and about the second I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to understand the history. If you're going to tell me the Constitution is great and the United States is great because of it, yay, fine, woo, fly a flag. Show me why. I live in Missouri, boys and girls. Show me. Got to prove your point. And this is where the sources come in. The Shapiro Library for Southern New Hampshire has all kinds of sources. It's there. And there's plenty more sources. We're in the age of information. We've got actually the age of too much information in some cases. But you have to be able to prove your point. And what I want you to do is go to the history. I don't care about today. That's today. Ditch it. Here, swipe my hands. Get rid of the today. I want to see about the past. I want to know why there was a constitution. If you're going to tell me it's great, why was there one? Do you know about the ratification? What was the ratification process? Why was it narrowly ratified? Where's the Federalists come in on this at? You know, there's all kinds of things here. And then the next thing I hear about the Bill of Rights is part of the, they passed it in 1787. No, they didn't. They did not pass it in 1787. There's a whole story to the Bill of Rights. Matter of fact, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are two separate things. They're together because of what took place later. But when they were first in 1787, there's no Bill of Rights. That comes up in 1788, and there's a reason why there is a Bill of Rights. So there's three stories right there. Actually, there's four. Articles of Confederation, Constitution, ratification process, Bill of Rights. I don't need all of it. You don't have to do all four of them. You need to be able to go through one. And a lot of times I try to separate you out to where you're focusing on some of these. Hey, what was so bad about the Articles of Confederation that they decided to write a constitution? Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. Focus on that. That's narrowing the topic down. Right now, don't worry about narrowing the topic down just yet. Find something that you're interested in. Those are the big three. Now, last thing on this. Some students like to, I got a project on this that I want to write about. Okay. And then I have two things I see with that. I see students who have got a great job and students who basically, this is what I want to do, but they don't want to put any work into it. And it turns into a mess. Education, your job, your life is about the effort that you put into it. And so the class, it doesn't take a ton of effort. It takes some effort. And when you start putting some effort in, because it's a hands-on thing, it starts to come together. and I can see it, and I've been doing this a while. I keep telling you all this. It's about effort. And I can tell when somebody's putting effort into something and somebody's not. When they're not putting any effort into it, at the end of this course, I get a hot mess. When people do put effort into it, at the end of this course, I'm going through the motions at that point because I say that I'm grading, but they've got a great deal. Boom, done. It just comes together because they put the effort into it and they fly to it. And then they take and build on what you learn in this class, and take it to your other classes, what you learn how to do research, that hands-on thing again. And you're going to do a lot of research going through school. That's part of it. I wrote all kinds of stuff. And then I went to grad school. You think this is tough? Take 4 16-week classes at the same time, writing a minimum of a 20-page paper in each one of those classes. Do it for a year straight. Then come back and tell me how tough 8 weeks is. It isn't that bad. I know it's a transition point, but to get to that point, you got to start somewhere else. I may have to be attacked by a dog. This is the Wizzle. She wants to be part of the class. Say, hello, Wizzle. She needs a bath, which is what I'm going to go do in a few minutes. But thing is, I just wanted to cover this stuff with you on history. This went a little bit longer than I wanted to, but it's a recap of Module 1 and then a little preview of what we're going to do in Module 2. Now, you've got 3 announcements a week minimum that I put in. I put in one on Monday, I put in one on Thursday, and I like to put one in on Saturday. So those are your 3 announcements of the week. If you need to contact me, email me. Perfectly good. If you're going to choose a different topic, you have to email me. And I have said no before because I've seen some stuff where people are coming at it, and I'm like, no, it's just going to be a hot mess. Let's just not do it. Stick with the basic stuff. And, you know, if you don't know what you want, pick one of the 3 again. Constitution is a great one. There's a whole wonderful story there. I've got bookshelves over here full of books on the American Revolution and Constitution. I go into it in depth. I'm a Hamilton fan, so how can I not like it? So that's some stuff you want to do. If you want to choose apartheid, by all means. If you want to do Chairman Mao, do not come to me saying communism bad, capitalism good. No. You've got to do more than that. But the thing I want to tell you about China is some of the source work's a little bit on the difficult side because the government of China has a bad habit of restricting primary sources like that. And right now, they're one of the restricted. They're in the restricted phases. I don't, maybe there's some context to why they might be feeling that way towards things. But anyway, so that's what I'm looking at right now with that. Again, questions, hit me up with emails. Number 2, you have the general discussion forum, use that. Because if it's something that's applicable to the whole class, talk to us there. Everybody can see that. Subscribe to it. And then when there's something new on there, you see something in there. Great ways to get a hold of me. That's about all I've got. So with that in mind, remember your 5 W's of history. Okay, remember the why being the important one. We covered history and heritage. I think there's no problem with that. We discussed bias. Again, I'm going to be grading your stuff tomorrow, well, today for you. I'll be grading Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of this week to get it all done. I do have multiple classes in my other college. I get paid by them too. It's their finals week. In fact, I'm going to log off of here and go write a final for them tomorrow. And I have to do some things to take care of them as well. But I like to grade quickly and fast. I believe you deserve the information, the feedback that I give you. And if you don't read the feedback that I give you, that's on you. Because I really go to great lengths to give you feedback that's personalized for you and what you're writing about. Okay, sometimes you don't necessarily need it, and I understand that. But on the other hand, a lot of you sometimes do. I had one student once who didn't read any of her feedback, and I was sending her emails. She didn't read those either. And it just reached a point where I put down zeros for 3 weeks before she figured out that I wanted to talk to her. And then we talked and took care of things. But then I was able to go back and put the actual grade in. But I got her attention finally. So there you go. There's ways to communicate with me. So don't say you can't communicate with me. I've got students from previous classes still talking to me, which is fine. Again, this is not that complicated of a class, really. It's maybe rough if you're coming into it from no school, but it's okay. We'll work through it. I'm here to work with you. So, but to work with you, you've got to communicate with me. Many of you wrote communications down in the discussion forum. as being the most important thing a historian has? Well, it's the same thing in education, by the way, folks. So I combine history and education and communication together. Starts with you, though. All right? Okay. Good night. Have a good time. And I'll see you in module 2.